So good afternoon, partners. Um, Annette and Sarah and I, Victoria Orhovsky, are going to be joining you for a brief, hopefully informal and helpful chat on this topic that we prepared. We are sponsored by all these wonderful labels, as you can see. I'm sure we don't need any introductions. And so Sarah is a child and youth counselor with TDSB, Annette is a social worker, and I serve as a psychologist for the board, and we cover different quadrants. And what we're hoping to accomplish today is pretty tall order. So we're going to talk about challenges that students and families face in the context of virtual learning as we all learn as we go. Looking at the bright side, hoping that there is a bright side, and maybe you could share when we get to Q&A about your own experiences in terms of what advantages you have learned about virtual learning. I think Sarah is going to, Annette is going to talk about coping strategies for students and parents. It's going to be a bulk of our presentation. And Sarah is going to talk about resources in terms of where to find help. Before we get started, we wanted just to go over some of the basic rules. I call them rules of engagement. So we are recording this presentation, so please keep that in mind and don't share any information that could be identified. We are learning as we go, so we use this workshop as an opportunity just to reflect on some of the information that we have learned, and hopefully we can share some of it with you and you can share some of it with us. And I think because we're here in a very intimate setting, I think it's very important that we remain respectful to one another, ask brief questions. We will make sure that we leave about 20 minutes at the end of the presentation. So let's jump right in. I found this cartoon that I thought captures some of what is going on, the chaos of the virtual learning. I'm sure you could all relate. And I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the challenges that the students are facing. And of course, these are not all of them. These are some of the ones that I've kind of thought about based on my experience as a parent. I have a daughter in grade 12, speaking with Sarah and Annette and observing what is happening with both school and university students. So I think the biggest challenge kids are experiencing nowadays is not being able to connect with their friends. And I don't think we even know the magnitude of the impact that it may be having on students. Some of the challenges, and we know any change, whether it's positive and negative, is perceived as stressful. And so kids in virtual schools have to get used to new teachers, and some of teachers change even within since September. There are different formats, there are multiple platforms. Just before we started, we were stressing out over trying to figure out how to access the technology, make sure it's working. The expectations, I think, are very unclear for both teachers, students, I guess parents as well. And so there's constant adaptation, having to figure out what's working, what's not working. I think it's important to not dismiss the challenges of working with new students in a virtual environment. So these are new friends, new classmates, having to do group projects with kids that your children have never encountered before. Certainly lack of privacy is something that we haven't considered. When your kids go to school, brick and mortar, as parents, you don't see what they're doing. And now if they're challenged, if they're having difficulty reading, they may feel even more self-conscious because their siblings and other family members are sharing and learning space. There's certainly a lack of transition in terms of kids are telling us that they're just rolling out of bed and sit in front of the computer. They go through the school day, sometimes not leaving the desk, and they continue learning. There isn't really an opportunity for a break in between. We are hearing a lot about kids eating because now fridge is accessible. And they may be feeling bored, they may be feeling stressed out. And so that's something that parents need to keep in mind. And also sleep is very much affected because for some of the kids, there is loss of routine. So these are some of the challenges, of course, not all exhaustive. I try to make it funny, and I really like the cartoon at the bottom. It says, I virtually finished my homework. I think the challenges that parents are facing, you'll see in cartoon on the right, have to do with parents now suddenly have to teach children. And this is a huge challenge. As a clinical psychologist, I often tell parents, don't bother tutoring your own kids. You don't have an option here. And there are as many different learning styles as there are kids. I think another challenge is parents are also working virtually, trying to keep up with demands of the work, and that's placing additional demands on them. Um, there's less fun with parents having to be parents, caregivers, tutors, instructors, homework assistants. There's no question that it's becoming more stressful. Interestingly enough, as psychologists, we're hearing just recently in the most recent staff meeting, parents are saying, I can see my kid is not paying attention. Do they have ADHD? So it's a very, very different opportunity to observe things. Catastrophizing. We all wonder what's going to happen, what impact it's going to have. Parents worried about kids falling behind. And so I think that just kind of captures some of the practical challenges, such as not being able to connect to the internet, camera is not working, passwords are missing. I mean, the list goes on. I'm sure you can kind of chuckle at it or maybe just realize how really challenging it is for kids as young as grade 1. But there's a silver lining. And I'm hoping with the silver lining, somebody's actually monitoring that. I'm trying to keep on track. And so attendance, you can actually achieve perfect attendance. And I could not find a cartoon that would capture the silver lining that I'm talking about. So, bears with me. I will just kind of go through some of the points. I mean, there's certain advantage, especially in Toronto. People living in Toronto and having to commute in the past, there was a time saved and hopefully used wisely. Kids get to sleep in, especially high school students, and we know they have really, really hard time waking up. So this may be an advantage, getting better quality sleep as well as better quantity sleep. There's no such a thing as bad weather days. And I know some kids may be very disappointed that it doesn't happen, but for parents, certainly not having to worry about snowsuits or getting through snowbanks, that is clear advantage. For teenagers, they don't have to worry about what they're wearing. In fact, as long as they dress, clean up their face and brush their hair, that may be enough. Kids don't have to worry about social comparison. Nutritional choices. I've heard from some of the clients that now they can have access to all the snacks in the fridge. They can eat whatever they want. And parents are able to make some healthy choices in terms of providing kids with warm food and an opportunity to observe them actually consuming the food. Another advantage is that we are seeing is that kids are not feeling so excluded because there are no cliques, there are no groups, they're working kind of one-on-one. And as we talked about this being disadvantaged because they're not connected to peers, there's some advantage to feeling like everyone else. And participation. It's very, very important that kids could mute their microphones, they could mute their cameras. Teachers don't necessarily see what they're doing at the same time. They could jump in, they can speak up, they could type responses, which speaks to more different styles. So there are clearly some advantages. We're also seeing advantages in terms of accommodating kids with social anxiety, those who worry about presenting in front of others. Like I mentioned, they could mute their camera or just choose not to participate. For younger kids with separation anxiety, those of you who had kids in grade 1 or 2 who had a really hard time staying at school, especially in September, they feel safe and comfortable. And we are hearing in our department that for separation anxiety is significantly less of an issue because kids are feeling safe and secure. For kids who have difficulty staying put or staying seated, there's much more opportunities for them to take breaks, wiggle around. Something that we normally put in the individual education plan in terms of accommodation could naturally be accommodated at home. Kids with learning difficulties, some of them are talking to us about being able to pause a lecture that's in high school for the asynchronous learning, for example. Kids could ask questions, kids could type responses, kids could kind of check in with what is going on. They could use headphones in order to minimize distractions. Certainly for kids for ASD and behavior regulation, some of them get support with their parents at home, but again, they don't necessarily have to stay put. They can engage in some sensory play in order to learn the information at the same time. Kids with medical issues, those who previously have been undergoing treatment could easily connect with the virtual schooling and not miss on the activities. So we think that there are at least two advantages. So one is that parents could actually observe their children and they can see for themselves what is happening in the learning environment and hopefully discuss it with teachers. But they could also support kids and put some strategies in place, like providing a wiggle ball, for example, for a child who has a hard time staying put in a chair. But we also thought that this may be a good modality going forward for some of the students that I've mentioned, whether they have ongoing issues or whether there are some acute issues. This would be a good way to allow them to participate in learning and accommodate their various needs. So I'm handing it off to Annette.
Annette, we can't hear you. You have to unmute. Sorry, I did that thinking I was being smart and then I forgot. I was basically saying that at this point, you know, there's a lot of words on this page that are going to become the norm for us to learn how to use. And so what hasn't changed is the role that you as caregivers play in your child's education. We need you as parents, as caregivers, as the people who will be home with your students, or maybe not, but as the ones who are moving through this. I'm not changing the slides. Is somebody else on there? Okay. Okay. So a big part of what your role will be is to help your kids find the calm. In order for our kids to do the best learning that they can do, they need to find themselves in a regulated state, a state of calm, a state of space where they are able to kind of put beside the stressors of what's going on for them. And we all know that there are many at this point in our time. You know, how do we do that? I think is really just about, number one, figuring out what some of those stressors are, figuring out how to help your child find their calm, and then looking at ways of developing strategies that work for your children. And so this is taken from a slide. Can you hear me now? I just noticed there's somebody's commenting on my voice. Is that better? Okay. So what I was saying is that this is taken from a slide from the Merit Center, which is a self-regulation support service through Dr. Stuart Shanker. There's a lot of resources you can access online, and I think that's one of the best things about technology is that most of the information you might need or look for is pretty accessible, and it's there 24 hours a day. So that's one of the benefits of using technology. You know, we have a lot of tools when we're working with kids and families to try and teach them how to manage some of the stressors that are happening for us. And one of the easiest things that we can all do and at home you can do is start to help rationalize some of the stressors and worries and fears that your kids are having. You know, there's a lot that we don't have control over right now. If you're watching the news every day, if they're hearing what's happening in the world, what's happening in our communities, that can feel really overwhelming. But if you look on the other side, we have many things that we do have control over. So no, we can't control the virus. And maybe for many of the kids who are virtual, we can't control the fact that we've had to go virtual. And some kids might be mourning the fact that they're not with their friends in school, might see, you know, aspects of their friends in school, but we can control that we're in a safe space. We have control over the people who are around us and how we you know, manage our day, and maybe we get to know new people and find new ways to build relationships in a very different space. You know, There's a lot that we do in schools, and I'm sure your kids have probably talked to you about why mindfulness has become such a buzzword. We need it. We all do. We all need it, and we all need to find our way to doing different ways of accessing this. And what we do with a lot of our little kids, I'm not sure how this is coming up, guys. Thanks. What we do with our little kids is give them basic skills, right? And so mindfulness can be just as simple as taking a deep breath. And some of the ways that you do that, you might think is just, breathing, but it's really learning how to pay attention to your breathing. It's learning how to hold breath, see how it feels in your body. And that can be simple. So I'm just going to do a real quick one with you. So what I want you to do is breathing in through your nose, smelling the flower like we teach the little kids, and then afterwards breathing out like you're blowing out your candles. So I just want you to breathe in for this. Hold it. And then just breathe out. And I don't know if that was helpful for you, but that's just a quick way, I think, to help our kids kind of get back to finding some calm. So when they're maybe agitated or silly or not focused or getting stressed or worried or fearful or overwhelmed by a task that the teachers ask them, that might be one simple thing that you can try doing with your kids, young, old, and us ourselves. So breathing is a really quick and easy way to find some calm. There we go. Sorry, I went too fast. Grounding is a strategy we often use in therapy, and it's a different way of sort of looking at how to find calm. And we usually use those with really extreme sort of difficulties of dysregulations. But it is a very simple thing to do too. And sometimes it is just really being mindful of what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and what you're tasting. And so this is one quick way of sort of looking at grounding, but grounding is really a practice of being mindful of your thoughts to your feelings, to your body, to the environment. Yeah, I have 3 kids who are virtual right now, and I can tell you that, at every point of the day, I've got one of them coming to me and being like, this sucks, I hate this, I don't want to do this anymore. So really what I think sometimes we can do is help our kids reframe what they're being challenged by. One of my kids struggles with math. So it's like, I can't do math, I can't do math. So it's really stopping to say, what can't you do? What is the hard part about this? What have you done to try to solve this problem? What are your ways that you can try to move forward in solving that problem? But really, I think it's just giving our kids a reframe of some of the negative thoughts that are there and turning it on its head and finding a way to move through problems and problem solve. Sometimes we do this with kids with a lot of dysregulation in class. I don't know if you've got younger kids, you might have heard of calming corners, spaces. That's one strategy that many of our classroom spaces use to help kids kind of regulate within the classroom space. It's a safe space. There's lots of tools there to help kids. Right now, it's ideal because at home, those tools will be readily available to your kids, to your young adults, to be able to find their way to find their own calm, right? What works for one child might not work for another. I have to say, not every kid's going to love to do that deep breathing. Not every kid's going to want to do the mindfulness stuff. Not every kid's going to react well to reframing a negative thought. But finding things that work for each of your kids is going to be very important, and helping them figure out what works for them then becomes almost a practice of mindfulness as well. Getting outside. I can't stress this enough, especially for some of our kids who don't have access to being outdoors all that often. Being outside is not overrated. It is sorry. Okay, I will keep my head straight. Being outside is, so important, especially now as our weather's changing and we'll probably be outside less. For many of our families, it might not be as easy to be outside. That's where I urge parents and caregivers to bring the outdoors in. If you can't get your kids outside on a regular basis, daily basis, maybe even every few days, then bring the outdoors in. Because what will happen is you will start to give them access to nature, and nature has such a powerful, meaningful way of helping people find calm. So whether that be maybe setting up a space where you're growing a plant, whether it be like you bring in some of the leaves that are outside that the kids can do a craft with, or doing something along those lines. If being outside is accessible, then I would urge at least 20 minutes each day for your kids. Do a walk, at lunchtime if you can, if you have that flexibility. After school, if you're working outside of the home, come home and say, let's go to the park. Let's take a walk. Let's go find something. Let's do a nature hike. And if you can't, then maybe making sure that happens on the weekends to the best of your ability. There's many spaces in our city that you can access, so it's really important, I think, to do what we can to find our way to being outdoors, especially as the winter comes and even during winter. Um, Routines, I think I can't stress this one enough. I got a call from one of my kids' teachers the other day, and she's like, I've noticed that Luke comes back a little late after recess. And it's true, he was. And it was important for me to see that, what, some of these things he needs help with. So I need help with too, because if I get busy, he's not on task, we get a late kid. So we've had to set up, making sure that we have access to timers. The stove is on with our timer at recess so that everybody knows once it goes off, it's back to work in case mom gets busy or dad gets busy or whomever is at home with them, to help them get back on track. So being able to set up routines and whatever that looks like in your child's life, might be visuals, it might be just timers, it might just be checklists. Make sure that they have access to understanding what their day must look like. There we go. Space is key, and I know that that might be, a difficult situation in different homes, but sometimes it is as simple as these young people at the table. If that's the only space you have, being creative in how you set it up so that kids can, be able to have a little nook of sorts. Some people can get to the dollar store and grab those corrals. They're available there. If not, grab a cardboard box next time you're at this supermarket and be able to, let the kids get creative with it, even setting up, visual schedules and put on their little pictures, things that might make it their own unique little space. If they're using technology from the school, some kids might benefit from using headphones. If that's not something you're able to access, that's something maybe that the school can help you access. Just let your homeschool know, perhaps, or your current teacher or the virtual teacher know that, what, you're looking to see if you can get access to headphones to help your child maybe stay focused and alert to what they're learning and maybe close off some of the distractions. And finding the materials you might need, and not all of us have a working printer. Being able to talk to the teacher about what you have access to and what you don't have access is going to be integral. But beyond that is it's really important that we recognize your well-being is just as integral as your kids, and what you and how you move through some of your stressors is something that they're observing and picking up on. And I think a lot more learning happens by them watching us rather than what we give them verbally. So you being well is just as important as them being well. It's sort of that analogy of the oxygen mask. We need you to put that oxygen mask on first so you can do the best you can to take care of your kids. And some of us do that already, and some of us struggle with it. Some of us don't know how to do that. So, number one, make yourself a priority. How often do you do that in your day? If you can do that daily, it's important, I think, to find a few minutes even doing something that really finds you your peace, your calm, and your own identity that highlights what your needs are and making sure that they get met. Taking care of your body. Maybe it's not that your grade 8 son wants to come for a walk with you, but maybe by you doing every day might encourage him to join you. I'm speaking from experience there. Reach out if you're feeling lonely, and I think many of us are these days. Find a way to connect to people. Reach out. You can be on a Zoom meeting, or you can do that, by phone. We've gotten back to writing letters and sending cards, my kids and I, and it's become a little bit of a nice moment for us. Finding your own way to be mindful and using some of those techniques of grounding and calm. And sometimes, if you're having a hard time getting your kids to do it, let them see you do it, and it becomes a little less sort of challenging or weird for them to experience. Check in with yourself. Daily check-ins are important, maybe at the end of the day, if you're keeping a journal, or even if it's just a verbal reflection, how was my day? What was challenging today? What did I accomplish? What was I surprised by? Do those types of check-ins, and I think you might find you have a better sense of where you're at. Um, have boundaries, and it's hard for many of us, I think, when we're trying to juggle so many things, but some things you can say no to your kids, right? And sometimes it's too much to play that game at the end of the day, but maybe just say, I'll reschedule with you. Or maybe you can't get to the park that day because you've been working all day and you're exhausted, but set aside a time where you can do it. It's okay to say no. And be kind to yourself. I can't tell you the amount of guilt I felt about making the decision to keep my kids at home. It's not an easy one. And I think we've all had to adjust to understand that nothing right now is easy for any of us. And I think we're all sort of struggling with the, am I doing what's best for my kids? And I guess we're never really going to know until we get there, right? But I think, but every day, doing the best we can to be reflective and kind to ourselves is probably the best start. And I think by you being here, that's probably sign in of itself that you are doing a wonderful job. Do what you know. And then I think really pay attention. When you know there's something wrong with your body, with your mind, it's time to look for help. And we'll talk about that next with Sarah. It's okay, I think, to ask for help. And I think if you've never felt comfortable doing it in the past, this is the time to start. I don't think that we can do much of this by ourselves. And, maybe seeking help is just asking a friend to watch the kids for a little bit, or somebody in your family, in your bubble, or maybe it's just, talking to somebody. And a lot of our counseling and supports have gone virtual. So it's not even about you having to leave your home or leaving your kids with somebody. It's really just about making the time. So on that note, I will pass it on. Oh, wait, actually, sorry. I want to sort of just highlight, when is it important to seek help? I think we really know that there's been some changes with our kids, and I think we're really seeing a lot of what we're going to discuss now. We're going to see a lot of it, and it's going to be reflective of our kids. We've been in a constant state of distress for the last 7 months. And so what might be happening doesn't necessarily mean that we're dealing with a mental health illness. It might just mean that we have some signs or red flags or symptoms that we might want to check out. So when do you seek help? Well, when you see a normal, typical change in behavior, the things that you were not seeing before in your child have become so prolonged and so problematic that you're concerned. For how long has that been going on? How intense is that? And what's the frequency of it? So sleeping, eating, mood, all of those things. How long has that been happening? How long is it? What's the frequency of those sort of intense feelings? Then that might be a sign that it's time to talk to somebody about getting some help. What's the impact as well on their day-to-day, on them as an individual? How is it impacting them in their relationships? How is that impacting on their school, like in their focus and their ability to do their work? If you're seeing signs that there's been a significant change in your child and it's being reflected in other aspects of their life, not just in your relationship, then this might be the time that you want to talk to somebody. So distress can look like a few things. Difficulty with focus, difficulty calming down or relaxing, extreme emotions, extreme overreactions, changes to eating more, eating less. And I think, we already talked, Victoria already mentioned, the fact that we're, right beside the fridge maybe might be another issue, but is it becoming so problematic when you're addressing it? Less cooperation, refusing to do things like chores or complete homework or start learning. Maybe there's new fears or the return of old fears. Maybe there's signs of depression like fatigue, lethargy, hopelessness. Maybe there's increased frustration or aggression with their caregivers or their siblings. Maybe they've become clingy. They don't want to go to bed by themselves, or they're worried if you leave the room or anything along those lines. And if you've seen anything different that weren't present prior to the lockdown. These are all taken from the American Institute of Stress. And so these are things that, might be the red flags for you to say, well, this might be something that I want to check in with. So I'm going to pass it on to Sarah.
All right. So thank you, Annette. So we've established that you have concerns about your child's health, mental health and well-being, what to do next with respect to the TDSB. So, here we go.
Sarah, you're muted.
And I was doing so well without interruption. So we've established that you have concerns about your child's mental health and well-being. What do we do next? In Ontario, schools are the most common place where children and youth access mental health supports. So we encourage you to take an active role and work with your school to help make sure your child gets the support they need. Things have definitely become a lot more complex as educators and staff transition and adapt to our new virtual educational system. Yet we still continue to work towards early identification of mental health concerns for students, so we can help support your child the best way we can. If you're concerned about your child's mental health, you can speak directly to your child's teacher. In doing so, try to be specific about your concerns, situations your child has dealt with that may have impacted their mental health, strengths they have, approaches that seem to work with your child, and specific behaviors you might be noticing. Ask the teacher what they've noticed. We understand that this will most likely be the first time your child has met their teacher within the virtual world, and a relationship may not be established as of yet. This would be a perfect time to connect with your child's homeschool, the school that they attended prior to virtual learning, and request support on that end. So connecting with previous, I'm not changing anything. Sorry, I just noticed the slides are changing, but I'm not doing anything. Sorry, I just noticed the slides are at the end. Here we go. I'm not sure who's controlling it, but we got it back. Okay. So this would be a great opportunity to connect with your child's homeschool and see what supports can be provided. If you're not already aware, your child's homeschool, so again, the school that they attended prior to virtual learning, are the holders of your child's OSR, so your Ontario student record. They are also in a position to set up any type of supports for your child as well. So although this is something that's a little complex, and I mean, the idea, the positive or the silver lining in this case would be that now you have two sources of supports trying to support your child. But feel free to connect with whomever you feel most comfortable with to ensure that your child's needs are being met. In doing so, you may want to request a school support team meeting or an IST, which would be an in-school support meeting, or an SST, which would be the school support team meeting, to further look into other supports, including professional support services for your child. So here's a little fun and interaction. Using the chat box, if you're interested, feel free to list any types of professional support services that you are aware of that your child in a virtual setting can access. Any supports would work. Here we go. Let's speed up the game a wee bit. So some of the professional support services that are available are attendance counselors, child and youth counselors, child and youth workers, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, psychologists, social workers, and speech and language pathologists. These are all professional support services within the TDSB, and I'll move into how we can access those supports. Yes, and I noticed Elise mentioned here that there's youth mental health agencies, in addition to all the professional support services that I've listed. Part of the process would be ultimately to also engage with community supports as well. So how do we access these supports? Most supports are typically, the referral process would be to have your child to hold an IST, which would be an in-school support meeting, or an SST, to obtain a referral for any of these supports. At these meetings, parents and guardians are invited to attend, and children and youth 16 and over are also encouraged to attend this process as well. And typically what happens is staff would present any observations or any concerns that they've noted regarding your child. Staff typically prepare for these conversations by beginning with sharing students' strengths, as well as presenting any documentation or observations that they may have seen, patterns or behaviors that may have changed or persisted or continue to interfere with your child's learning and social interactions. This would be a great opportunity to gain knowledge about the circle of supports within the TDSB and outside the school system, and an explanation of how these services are accessed, including internal referrals, should also be provided during this phase. Again, looking at silver linings, historically, these were held in school, and due to parents attending work and other commitments, it's a difficult process to attend sometimes and to make it fit in your day. One of the beauties now with virtual world and online learning is that we can do this through Zoom meetings or other platforms as well. So having said all this and understanding that although we're trying to look for the silver lining here, this is definitely a work in progress and it's not perfected just yet. And we acknowledge that this may create a few extra steps in order to ensure clear communication is maintained between your child's current teacher, administrator, as well as their home schools. We appreciate your patience as we navigate this process with you, and welcome any type of questions, concerns that you may have at this time. Please feel free to reach out to your PSS staff with any concerns or questions that you may have with respect to mental health and well-being, supports, treatment plans, accommodations. You know your own reality best. And it's truly helpful when both families and professional support services, schools, and communities are in touch with each other. Let's keep in touch. Let's stay connected as we work through this together to support the mental health and well-being of your child while attending virtual schools. Here we've provided a couple of resources. I think that the hard part when we're looking at the entire TDSB is to indicate the resources that are most helpful to you and your school community or your child's needs would be a little bit difficult. So what we've provided here were a few resources where you can click onto and enter your address, and it would put up the community resources within your area that you may be interested in attending. So that's all I've got. And I thought maybe this would be a great opportunity to open up the conversation to any questions or concerns you may have. What's working with your students? What do you feel is something that the TDSB could look into or support you? We just thought we'd provide a couple minutes here to hear from parents and caregivers, some of the thoughts or concerns that are on your mind. Feel free to unmute yourself or enter a question in the chat if you prefer. So we have one here. It says, my daughter's school went from JK to SK, and then she transferred this year to a middle school. Last year, she had someone to talk to. Can I reach out to him to see if he can talk to him again? She had an IEP and she has ASD, ADHD, and so this has been a transition. 100%. I would, in that particular case, I don't know if either of you ladies would like to respond to that, but definitely get in touch with your homeschool and see if they can arrange that process for you. In the event that maybe that staff person has changed or been placed at a different school, feel free to get in touch with your administrator to see how to set up that process.
Well, I can just jump in to say that the psychologists and social workers are assigned to specific schools. So it may be the case that the elementary school that your daughter was at has the same support person, social worker, psychologist, child and youth worker assigned to that school. So that would not be very difficult to create that transition. It would be just a matter of a psychologist at the current school, a social worker at your current middle school, willing to speak with that person. So those kind of things could be accommodated. However, if that isn't possible, then the middle school that your child is attending right now could also help you connect with the right person to have the right fit.
Yeah, I would add too, I don't think there's any harm if you have a working relationship with the previous support staff. They might help navigate this a little quicker than you having to call the new school or talk to the teacher. And I mean, that just is one less thing I think to take off your shoulders. And the worst thing that could happen is they say, you know what, I'm no longer going to be assigned to your child. However, this is the place to call. It just kind of minimizes, I think, the need for, you know what, where do I call or how do I call? Just especially if you've got that working relationship already. So there's another question that came in from Karen. It says, how are the coping strategies mentioned in the presentation being incorporated online? I think it's going to be different for every.
Annette, could you speak up? Like you can hear the.
Still can't hear me?
Yeah. Now, when you lean into computer, you can
Okay.
hear you very well.
I'm going to get my big face on the camera
Yes.
as a result.
Yes. That's okay.
So it's the question was around how those coping strategies might work in online learning. So it's going to be very different, right? And I think pay attention to what your child's learning class and day looks like. And many of the teachers have incorporated it into their learning. There might be called brain breaks. They might be called yoga or mindfulness moments. And find out how they might work with your individual child's class. And if you don't see things, then you know what, there's no harm. Reach out to your child's teacher and say, I'm just wondering if there could be an opportunity for some social emotional learning or some mindfulness that could be incorporated into the learning day. My kid benefits from it, right? And I think that one kid might benefit, but all kids would definitely benefit from all of those strategies.
I see here, I'm not sure if I'm missing a question, but Elise indicated my daughter mostly misses her peers or their peers, teachers at homeschool and feels that she lost her friends. How do we address this real problem? It's not only just a feeling, she was separated from peers. I think you're bang on, right? Just the idea of social isolation. And we know that having a sense of community can make the world of difference in a child's education and feeling that they belong. I'd encourage you to reach out to the school. So I can speak to my role specifically. My role is an itinerant child and youth counselor. And what we've been doing is reaching out to schools to see how we can build capacity within the schools. How could we, it may not look the same, but how can we engage students in some of the same programs we had before? Friendship groups, communication groups, mental health and well-being groups. And trying to see like, what is it? What are students, what are parents suggesting is the need in that particular school, and how could we help facilitate that process? So it may look different for different schools, but I'd encourage you to contact your administration and request to see what type of school-based strategies, or can they incorporate something like a PSS staff member, like a child and youth counselor, social worker, or a team of professionals to help collaborate and build some type of a program to address that need. Because you're right, it's a real need. Thank you for sharing.
There's another comment or question from Karen that says, children who've experienced trauma may be finding COVID-19 exacerbates our earlier trauma, or children who haven't are now experienced trauma. What are your suggestions or recommendations? And I would say to that, you're very, very accurate, right? Because I think a lot more happens in our child's lives at school, in the school building, than many of us really realize. Those relationships are integral. And so a lot of that has fallen onto the caregiver's shoulders now, because, that maybe that gym teacher or the EA or the CYW in the classroom, those types of supports are no longer there. and those connections. And there's almost like a level of grief, I think, that many kids are experiencing because they're not attached to any of those other relationships. And we know kids do well with caring adults in their lives, right? And it's not just us, it's others who play a role. So to that, I would say you're right. I think right now it's really about how do we address trauma and what that looks like for each child and what their experiences are. If you're working with, have worked with a support staff in the past, reach out to that person and I think look at what could be an ideal treatment path for your child at this time. If you're noticing some of those other red flags we talked about, then I think it is really about saying right now, if I start at the school, you know that it's best to start with the teacher, start with the homeschool, do that SST meeting where all of us sit at that table and we can start to discuss ways of treating and supporting kids and accessing resources that are appropriate.
I also want to add that when kids experiencing trauma, whether it's new or recurrent, they are more likely to exhibit symptoms of anxiety and acute distress. And what that means is that they will have much harder time learning. So in addition to addressing their physical, their cognitive, their emotional, behavioral symptoms, whether it's through individual support or school-based or community, also maybe revising expectations in terms of how quickly the children are going to be learning, how much they're going to be progressing, and focusing on their mental health before focusing on their academics per se, reaching out to teacher, asking, even if the child never had a formal IEP in place, it's important that some of these strategies be put in place in terms of giving students extra time, reducing workload temporarily or as long as necessary. So addressing a whole child would be very important.
Just going back to a question that we bypassed here. So B says, my daughter's teacher online has over 10 students with IEPs, and some days I feel she's overwhelmed and I don't want to reach out to her because she seems frazzled.
I would suggest reach out to her, even though she seems frazzled. I mean, she has support services available to her as well in the form of other teachers, administration. I think it's a two-way street. So often we don't want to trouble our loved ones or our friends with our concerns, but unless we do, they don't know what those concerns are. So it may be that a professor at my university used to say that if you thought of a question, the chances are somebody else have thought the same question. So be the first one to ask, because maybe just because a teacher has 10 IEPs in class doesn't mean that they will have to address each aspect of each student individually. And in fact, she could come up with some strategies. You could also request, I think Annette and Sarah both talked about the IST, where it's a brainstorming opportunity to see how specific class needs could be addressed as a class, not just a person. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'm just going to add to that. I think we are still in flux. There are still some students who don't have teachers and aren't assigned classes, right? And so I don't know that even the teachers are aware that they have access to the resources that are out there still. There seems to be, you know, perhaps a delay in what teachers know they have access to. So you might have more knowledge at this point than some of the teachers do. So there's no reason not to, I think. And you know what? Validate it. It can see how hard it is to manage 10 kids with IEPs. I think that would go a long way with building your relationship with your child's teacher as well, because I'm sure she probably feels her own level of worry and uncertainty and fear and anxiety, and making sure she's doing the best for all of those kids in that class. So there's no reason not to. You have every right, and it would be probably in the best interest of all of the kids in that class.
I'm just going to piggyback off that, Annette, and say that, like, what a great way to build a relationship is by honoring and noting the stress that teacher might be in, right? We're all going through this, whatever this is, to a certain degree, like in a different way. And I just think of that teacher potentially also having a family and also having their kids, you know, virtual learning, and also having the other things that many of you here today are experiencing. So yeah, a level of compassion and maybe using that as an opportunity to reach out and connect is a fantastic way to move forward.
There's another question from Chase, and it says, in my son's virtual classes, only 1 or 2 students have their cameras on. So teachers can't see their students and students can't see their classmates. My daughter's in private school and it's mandatory for students to have their cameras on. Why are cameras not mandatory at TDSB? You know, I don't know that we have the full understanding of how this is going to work or how it is working. But I think there's been some discussion around perhaps safety, perhaps well-being, perhaps, you know, what works best in each class and with each profile of student at this point. I think, you know, that's a question to bring to your child's teacher. It might be the teacher's not comfortable having all the cameras on at the same time, might be distracting for them. So there's a lot that might be behind why the cameras might not be on, but if you feel that is something to be addressed, I would encourage you to bring it to your child's teacher.
I know with some platforms as well, depending on the number of students that their camera is on, they're only allowed to have X number of students on at one time with their camera. I saw in the chat, somebody else noted as well that it just helps with the lag time as well. So there's a number of different reasons. And then I always think back to students are now bringing their entire school into their home. So sometimes in an attempt to, you know, just keep some things private, it may be an opportunity for them to just click that camera off, right? And focus on the content versus whatever may be surrounding them in their home. So just being mindful that we're now going into students' homes completely, and there may be other reasons behind that as well. I'm trying to see if we've missed anything here. Samina says, my daughter is in JK grade 1. She is very smart, but she is very careless. No learn, no teach, and no care anybody saying something to her. I'm worried about her. So it sounds like mom is concerned in this case.
Mm-hmm. So the process, years ago, there was a document published called Education for All, and the steps were outlined for any concern that you have. Your first point of contact is your teacher, teacher assistant. Again, I think, was it Annette or Sarah mentioned talking about very specific things, like what is it that you're concerned about? For example, a child could only sit for 10 minutes, for example. Oh, my child can't do math and she throws temper tantrums. Or my child seems distressed, worried, concerned. Ask the teacher what the teacher is seeing, also in terms of kind of very specific things on her end. If things could not be addressed or problem solved at that level, then the teacher has an option of bringing it to the attention of IST, which is in-school support meeting with other teachers and admin, maybe teachers who teach the same grade. If that is not sufficient, then they could bring it to even more involved team, which also involves psychology, social work, speech and language pathologists. Again, bringing more people to the table, not necessarily to diagnose or assess, but just to brainstorm and see what other strategies could be put in place. So go through the steps. That's what I'd recommend.
And I know many PSS groups or professional support service teams are now looking at other ways to create space virtually. So having an opportunity or office hours online where parents, teachers, students at different times obviously can ask questions and connect and address some of the concerns that you're noting today. So I know that it works, and it's something, you know, another option that maybe you had access to before as you walk through the doors of a school, and now we just have to find a new creative way to address some of those concerns.
I think it's also important to remember that there are some students whose learning styles do not match with the nature of virtual schooling. Mm-hmm. I think it's very, very important to recognize. You know, I wanted to mention earlier that there is like very little hands-on activity. And for some kids, especially younger kids, that is their main learning modality. For some kids, hearing information and seeing information is too distracting. So I want to assure, I guess, parents that, you know, I'm hearing a lot of concerns about my child's not learning. Does my child have a problem? I mean, this is such an uncertain time in the life of children, parents, teachers, I think it's important to keep in mind that when kids come to Canada from war-torn countries, kids who have missed out on educational opportunity because they lived in remote villages, when they do come and they receive proper and sufficient instruction, they catch up. So I can't promise you or guarantee anything, but once this is over in a shape or form that would allow all the children to return to school, additional strategies will be put in place in order to address students who truly fell behind. So what I usually tell the parents, when your daughter is ready to get married, she's not going to be wearing diapers, and nobody's going to be very concerned whether she failed the quiz in grade 5. So I think it's very important to focus on each day, getting through the day, focusing on well-being of children and families. And at the end, I don't want to say what Doug Force says, that we'll come out stronger, but we will get through this somehow.
So Karen just gave us a very solid and important question. She says she's the executive director of the Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services in Scarborough, and it's very challenging, particularly for our immigrant and refugee parents whose first language is not English, to navigate the school system, read the emails from the schools, et cetera, and navigate it, right, and get through. How can this be facilitated? So I would say that number one, we all have access to interpretation services, no matter who we are, what our roles are, and we can even access them via phone. So we use a phone interpretation service, and we have in-person interpreters that we can all access. Our documents can be interpreted as well. So if families need it in a certain language, or if they need access emails or any, homeschool can be able to access the right services in our board to have all documents sent to family in their appropriate language. This is where sometimes maybe people like our community support workers, our settlement workers might be of great support, and we can work in tandem with them, and be sure to make sure that we are helping our families navigate all of this. So there are a lot of services in our school board that we can be accessing first and foremost. And of course, advocates. If families need advocates or supports from the community, they're always welcome to be part of the discussions around students, as long as families have given us permission to include them.
And just to add, right now in our presentation, we have a live interpreter who is working with families that requested that language support. So in fact, at this point, it's even easier to ensure that support is available.
And, you know, just as Karen brought up that question or that comment, I think it's important that if parents and community members have any ideas or things that they've seen that have worked outside the TDSB in other communities, or have any recommendations or requests, please bring that forward. I think it's important for us, especially at this time, to reach out and see what works best in order to support students and our community needs.
I think we are almost at the end. Are there any more questions?
We're given a pretty strict timeline. We got to be out. I think maybe, I don't know if it's helpful, but if we can definitely list our emails in the text if anyone needs.
Yep.
If anyone has any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to either of us. I just noticed there's one comment that we missed from Colleen Brown. And she indicated, be the first one to ask. Thank you for saying that. I am the parent that reaches out to teachers, even if there appear to be no problems. Teachers see my kid differently. I miss the Meet the Teacher night. And I think that's a great opportunity, Colleen, to bring that up, because this is an amazing time to connect as a community, support one another, support each other. I think it's a perfect opportunity. So thank you for noting that and supporting your fellow parents out there as well.
So on that note, I think our time has unfortunately come to an end. We know we have to vacate the premises basically for the next presenters to be able to set up. I think we've all listed our email contact in there. Please feel free, reach out, and if you have further questions, and we can hopefully help you navigate and support your students learning virtually.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.